Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our fourth of 5 sessions on conscious leadership with a particular focus on women's leadership and the sacred feminine. As we begin our program today, I want to draw some reflections together about the cosmological nature of the sacred feminine through the prism of the extraordinary work that Veda Austin, the New Zealander who's doing the most cutting edge research on water, is bringing to life, particularly the breakthroughs that she's been experiencing over the last 2 months with the autistic young people called autists, who, as probably all of you know who've listened to the telepathy tapes, manifest extraordinary clairvoyance and genius at levels that are shaking the foundations of human epistemology. I want to recommend anything that you can find on Veda, particularly a podcast that was just released, I think, yesterday between Veda and Pamela Gregory, the astrologer that many of you follow. I'll put the link in the chat in a few minutes. But I want to focus our attention here on the cosmological dimensionality of the sacred feminine. You know, we often talk about the sacred feminine as manifested through Athena or Kali or Kuan Yin as goddesses in the um, archetypal levels of being. We've talked about the feminine in terms of Gaia, Gaia being a manifestation, our Mother Earth, known as the Mother Earth in virtually every culture around the world. But what's coming through Veda's work on water is an extraordinarily profound understanding of not only water, but the sacred feminine. And she's been arriving at that insight, these breakthroughs, through the communication with these autists who are so clairvoyant. They not only engage in mental telepathy and remote viewing and various of the other things that we are learning about, they meet regularly in the etheric realms with each other from all over the world. They lie in their beds or they sit in their chairs, wherever they are, and they're communicating and building community in the etheric realms, in a place they call the hill, where they meet on a regular basis and have broken into small little interest groups and so forth and so on. And they have the capacity of not only terrestrial clairvoyance, shall we say, but they can tap into the Akashic field. And Veda simultaneously, through her research in water, is uncovering something that, as far as anybody knows, has never been discovered by another human being, ever. And that is that water communicates through what she's calling hydroglyphs that look a lot like code. They look a lot like hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptians, or you can think of the Babylonian cuneiform. And when she began to uncover this, she didn't know what it meant. And she began to research it and found some symbols that seemed to be recurring. But the autists that she's now in communication with can read hieroglyphs. And what they're telling her is that these hieroglyphs are literally the mind of God as the source consciousness manifests itself into form. So just imagine the Big Bang for a moment. And as soon as the bounce happens and that which cannot be spoken begins to take shape, the first thing that comes within a nanosecond or two is hydrogen, the first element on the table of elements. And that hydrogen, which is really the building block, as you'll discover if you've read Veda's work, is not only present throughout the manifest world, but is the constitutive building block of dark matter itself. So hydrogen is everywhere. And it is through the permutations of hydrogen as the table of elements begin to take shape that is embedded the sacred feminine. And I have a lot more I can say, but I want to keep this brief. But I just want to make reference to one biblical passage out of the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, where the seer says that when God created creation, it was Sophia who was with God. And it was through Sophia that God created everything that has been created. So when Veda is seeking to understand the hieroglyphs embedded in water, she's beginning to understand intuitively and now more and more explicitly that water is life, because water is that which animates that transition from the invisible realms into the manifest world. And she said something on the podcast with Pamela, which is a thought that I want to leave us all with as we contemplate the sacred feminine. The autists, without exception, wherever they are in the world that are communicating, say the same thing about water. It has 7 phases. And we know 3 of them is water being water, and then, steam, and they discovered plasma and other aspects of water that we know. But the highest form of water is, guess what? Thought. And I want everybody to just pause for a moment and think that thought and entertain the possibility that our thoughts, while we think they're personal, may be emanations from the cosmic hydrogen water out of which our manifest being evolves and is shaping us in ways that we can't even imagine including our perception that we're having these thoughts on our own. That's how merciful divine consciousness is. That even as the cosmic mother holding everything in this dance of Shiva, in the dance of Kali, we're being supported by water. We're being supported by the mother in every instant of every microsecond of our lives. And our appreciation of this is key, according to the autists, in unfolding this next phase of human evolution and development that is seeking to break through the breakdown that we see all around us in our world. It may, in the end, be connected to the insights that we're gathering about water. And Veda is going to be with us in Chartres this July for 7-day consecration in the sacred waters of Chartres. So I want to encourage everyone as we witness revolutionary breakthroughs to take advantage, if you can, to come to Chartres between the 6th and the 12th of July to experience Veda Austin and other faculty who will be sharing with us all in person the sacred maternal aspects of the divine feminine as it's made manifest in water. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising. Always a pleasure. And now I turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington.
Thank you, Jim. We have this game with each other where periodically your opening comments, I'm at a loss to how to build a bridge to today's conversation. And I'm just immensely grateful to have Sean and Heidi and Jude here to support me in building that bridge and having the conversation we've got planned today. So thank you for your opening comments. And Jude, Heidi, Sean, come on screen and look forward to a wonderful program today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah. Yeah. How do you follow up what Jim just said? My hair's blowing back. Wow.
Well, I'm just delighted we have Jude and Heidi with us to help figure that out.
Jude, would you lead us in a reflection practice this morning for everyone? That'd be lovely. Thanks.
I'll be delighted to. And it's lovely to be here with our Humanity Rising community once more. So to begin, I'm going to guide us into an invitation to awaken our inner creativity and presence. And one of the beautiful things about water is its presence. It is always present. It is present throughout our lives. It is present throughout the cosmos. It is present. It literally waters our souls. And so to awaken our creativity into the waters of our own souls and the cosmos, I invite us to, first of all, relax. Close our eyes and focus our attention on your breathing. And as you breathe out, feel that you're releasing anything in your life that no longer serves you. And then as you breathe in, sense a renewal that, like water, flows through you, gently energizing and refreshing you. And continue to focus on the cycles of your breath. feeling yourself becoming more and more relaxed and at peace. And now imagine that you're breathing in the light of the sun, the liquid light of the sun, as a thread of golden light that flows within you and into the energy center of your heart. And as the light continues to flow, sense that a tiny sphere of gold begins to form in your heart center and to grow and brighten with each breath as it becomes a size that you feel, you know, intuitively know is perfect for you at this time. And now sense that as you breathe within the sphere of golden light, gently send your awareness downwards through your body, continuing beneath your feet, and on down into the embrace of our beloved planetary home, Mother Gaia. Continue to send your awareness down deep and still deeper until you sense that you've reached her center and her loving essence that nurtures each and all of us and all life, as does her waters. Now feel a pulse of her life-giving love, returning up and up, and then through your body and heart center, and on and up to the highest realms of spirit. And then a returning pulse of divine love from those highest realms down into your heart. Rest a moment, feeling that love within and around you. And now gently pulse this unconditional love through you, connecting all that is, has ever been and will be, and all that you are. And as each pulse of love flows through you, feel your awareness and sense of your creative potential expand beyond all limitations of space and time. Sense that all boundaries and barriers that limit, or you may perceive limit, your creativity gently dissolve as you feel more and more alive and present with the entirety of the cosmos. And know that you belong. You belong to and are a unique expression, a drop, as it were, of its vast communities, its vast oceans of sentience and life. And resting in the love and joy and gratitude of its presence, breathing through you in every breath you take. Awaken and open up to its invitation to be and to create in the unique ways that only you have been born to be and to do. Just feel the spiritual waters of possibilities and potential and evolutionary impulse and creativity, ever present and ultimately infinite and eternal, flowing through you. And now breathe deeply 3 times, fully embodying this awareness, and then open your eyes and return to see the world through new eyes. Namaste, everyone.
Jude, that was beautiful. Thank you. It's wonderful to establish, if you will, and create this energy field when we begin these wonderful conversations. It brings all of us not just physically into the room, but like into quantum entanglement. We're all in the field that you've created now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. And now I think it's over to Heidi to begin us and our what we're calling our tag team exploration of our theme today. Heidi, you're on mute, my love.
Thank you so much, Jude. And thank you, Sean, for bringing us together, and Jim and Tom for being with us in this beautiful opportunity. So there's no more critical time to understand the interrelationship of spirituality and activism, or the intertwined mystery of the one and the many, than now. We're at a gaping liminal space between the end of an age and the beginning of a new one, characterized by the breakdown of systems that evolved to deliver the old and now insufficient to the task of supporting the new. We've all learned in this last year or so that apocalypse means having the veil torn away, such that we see what has already arrived. And could any of us, even 3 months ago, have imagined the speed and the terror with which we are witnessing massive breakdown? This gives a whole new meaning to Bucky Fuller's question, his guiding question for his own life that he shared with us back in the 80s. What can one little individual do? Whole new meaning to the question of what can one little individual do indeed. We here in this gathering have studied many different forms of different ongoing spiritual traditions. All of them have radiant and radical forms of the divine feminine, which we'll be talking about today. I know of none of those forms in any of those traditions that are passive. They are all, in some cases, terrifyingly active. And every one of them seems in some way to be at a time of great transition and danger, as it is now. Aren't they too always an initiation into new understanding of and surrender to, particularly surrender to, creation and birth emerging out of chaos? And that to me is the water that Jim talked about, is this fine water permeating everything that is allowing that surrender to the creation as it is happening. The navigation of the nutrient soup of metamorphosis as a new form as old form dissolves to become a new one. Jude and I met 2 years ago as members of the evolutionary leaders who agreed to take on a particular synergy circle, to take on the perplexing failure of the Sustainable Development Goals in being achieved according to plan. For the sake of the condition, we took it on for the sake of the condition of understanding what's happening in our times, not just to be part of the UN process. So we've learned a lot together in these 2 years. And we're now co-stewards, along with 6 other men and women, of the deep and rapid transformation process that is the discovering and experimenting with multiple leverage points that may make a difference. An impossible task if you take it on boldly. Jude in particular brings a deep inner knowledge that has amplified the resonance that we all feel, that this is not a meta-crisis, but actually an evolutionary metamorphosis that we can live fully into without fear and with great engagement. So Jude, I'd like you to take us from there.
Thank you, Heidi. And one of the reasons, other than I love Heidi, who's an amazing human being, wonderful soul sister, is Heidi's taught us so much in this time about emergent learning. And emergent learning is a feminine way of learning in a way. It integrates the best of masculine and feminine. but it's a learning that doesn't seek to impose itself. What it does rather is attune and align with the evolutionary flow of what's coming through and then learn from that. So bringing those complementary attributes. But I'd just take a step aside for a moment, because one of the things that Heidi and I both share is a trust in our intuition, a trust in our intuitive wisdom. And of course, in an old paradigm of a mechanistic worldview and a worldview of materialism and separation, there is no place for such intuitive insights or wisdom. There's no place for the everyday miracles of synchronicities, because there's no place there for wholeness. And yet that worldview is now being turned on its head. And it's been turned on its head in its totality, to show us a universe that, as Sean briefly mentioned, is innately entangled, a universe that is what's called non-locally unitive, whole in its meaningful existence and evolutionary purpose. And so a universe which at its foundation is mindful and innately universally conscious. And from that, there's a realization that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They are literally what we and the whole world are. And that universal consciousness expresses itself, as the I Ching tells us, of the one that becomes, not separates, the one expresses itself, it differentiates itself into the complementarity of two. And from the two, then birth a third. And that third is the creative force that comes from the complementarity and the sacred marriage of the divine feminine and masculine, that divine child of creativity and wonder and evolutionary potential. And the I Ching goes on to say, and from those three, 10,000 things are born. So when we talk about a realization of this, we're also realizing in this new understanding that is indeed an ancient understanding, that intuition, of course, is a natural attribute. It's our superpower because we're inseparable from the entire universe. Synchronicities don't violate causality within space-time, but they're a way shower of our universe's innate sentience guiding us forward. And so in that sense, that discernment, that willingness to trust is one aspect of what I think we would consider to be feminine attributes. Not that Tom, Jim, men don't innately have them, because this is the beauty of the I Ching. It talks about the yin and the yang within all of us. And so what we're really talking about today is a yin expression that flows through all of us, men and women. So I think in that regard, to go on for Heidi and myself to share how we might consider yin attributes, feminine attributes, but yin attributes to be catalysts for transformational change, because based on a mechanistic worldview that dates back to the late 19th century and was at its height to drive its understanding drove the Industrial Revolution. That Industrial Revolution and its technologies were founded on a worldview of separation and materialism. And so they naturally engendered hierarchies. They naturally engendered a world where masculine attributes, goal setting, people were seen as cogs in machines, all of that, terminologies and ways of being have been with us since the late 19th century, and they're no longer fit for purpose, just as our worldview is no longer fit for purpose that we've had, and we're now turning into, an emergent, unitive, holistic perspective of consciousness. So what we can do now, it seems to me, is bring the best of masculine attributes, but now bring in those feminine yin attributes to catalyze transformational change. Because of themselves, what we've had is not up to, it's not up to the task of transformation, because it's caught in what is sometimes called Einstein's box. And what Einstein said, we cannot resolve a problem from the same mindset that's created that problem. And that mindset has been an essentially mechanistic mindset of yang attributes. So now what we can do, it seems to us, is bring forward yin attributes in terms of the potential to catalyze change. And how would I sum those up? I'd sum those up in what I call 8 essences. And the first is that of servant leadership, a recognition of being in service for the good of the whole. Not that I'm the top of the hierarchy, the top of the hill, but that I am serving the community, I'm serving my organization, I'm serving everything around me. That doesn't mean I don't also serve myself. It doesn't mean that I don't, ebb and flow and give and take with a balance of this, but it's recognizing that others are not there to serve me, that I can serve the good of the whole. The next one is, and this is one I recognize in my own journey because I used to be in business and I was a role model and I had a business card. And the business card preceded me into every room, and it was the mask I wore. And I left organizations in the corporate world where that mask just was not, I was not happy with the mask anymore. And what I realized is that instead of being role models, if we are brave, are courageous enough, compassionate enough, and feminine enough, we can be soul models. We can be who we are in all that we are, our truth, our vulnerability, just who we are. So soul modeling seems to me an attribute of feminine leadership that is easier perhaps for us to step into, but is an invitation for us all to step into, it seems, at this time. The next is a seer. Many women throughout history have been seers. They've seen the future. And I would say that the work that is being done with the autistic young people is the work of service of a seer, seeing what could be in our evolutionary future if we're open to this understanding. It's a perception. It's being perceptive co-creators of the highest purpose of what can flow through. Sensing. We're good at sensing. Yin attributes naturally sense. We can read a room more easily. We're able to be open to that. So how can we sense what is coming through at the moment? How can we attune to it, align with it to serve the good of the whole? Shaping ourselves, shaping the world around us, shaping our gardens, shaping in the sense of facilitating the emergence of something new and being willing to be in the unknowing and the unlearning and the vulnerability of that in these between times. Space holding, to just hold the space, not try and impose our will on the space, but just hold it. Allow what is seeking to come through, to emerge. Heidi is a maestro at this. And finally, sometimes stirring. Be a good stirrer. Whatever it is, whether it's a soup or porridge, or stirring a situation that has become stagnant, and doing so with inclusivity and without judgment. And finally, a shaker. Again, shaking up what needs to be shaken that's become stagnant and dormant, and we can bring new life to it. So that's how I'd suggest how women might catalyze. And Heidi, I know you've got something to add, a lot to add to this. So over to you.
Yes, it has been my experience. I mean, what does this have to do with change management at a time like this, where you just want to do something, right? and how do we bring what we've learned in the experience of applying this through time to now in a way that works? So my experience is that it is in the nature of the divine feminine to live in the experience of inner and outer as one space, not two. And to understand that transformation emanates from an inner piece, outward. So the work starts here. So in the last 40 years, rather than seeing my work as making change happen, I was always hired as large organizations, and I always worked with very hardline businesses, financial services, car making, things like that, because I loved their commitment to producing results in the physical universe. And at the same time, I was studying deep spiritual practices. And for me, what was mine to do was to bring those together and to make sure that they related, that you could see basically heaven in earth as you were working. So rather than seeing my work as making change happen, I've learned to hold the work as the privilege of being present, holding space, attending to whatever is needed as change evolves. When I used to work as a consultant at Ford Motor Company, I would tell them that I knew that change was about to happen because they asked me to come in. It wasn't because I was going to help them change to anything. It's that something was already in process that I knew how to live as it was happening. This is supremely evident in the transitional stage of childbirth. I've had 3 girls. And when in childbirth, there's this period called transition when the only way is through. You know that it's there because you want to get up and walk away. There's no way you could possibly do that. And during that time, now 3 times, having gone through that physically, where you actually, there is no choice but to keep going. What happens is that the physical body shape shifts, literally shape shifts. You're flooded with hormones in a way that your body, that the bone becomes gelatinous and in extraordinary ways as it needs to deliver the new life, literally traversing the valley of the shadow in service of a new life emerging. In Sanskrit, matri is the root of mother, of matrix, of measure for being and doing. Swatantra is the practice of holding the whole system within, which allows you to play any part as needed, rather than identify with any of those parts. So to be at play in the field. And at play is another way of saying in love to me. So the deep and rapid transformation process that Jude and I have been stewarding together, we've guided a series of 7 sets of ongoing dialogues, for example, in one phase of this, through time, in alignment with the 7 dimensions of the Summit of the Future, which was the UN's answer to how are we going to do something and be something different. So we conducted those series of sets of dialogues through time to establish the practice of the identity and the identity, the practice and the identity of deep listening. That is who I am, is deep listening as our currency for transformation. Keeping the attention on that connection in every single one of those dialogues, and in the way we used AI to actually help synthesize those dialogues so there could be recursive interaction with our own discoveries, right? So keeping that attention on that connection rather than establishing my position or needing to be right on anyone's part. And this was with over 160 experts meeting through time to merge in what they know, and more importantly, in what we didn't know, for a higher good, the good of the whole living system, beyond human to and beyond our planetary home Gaia. In business and community transformation, this shows up as seeking and offering breakthrough processes, or more likely, breakthrough environments, places to be, that allow people to include, allow, encourage shared line of sight and living into creative tension, that which has been described in business as the ability to hold both the ideal state at the same time as holding the brutal truth about the current reality. The ability to hold both of those at all times. And what better time than now to do that is what allows the abidance for that kind of truth to come forward. And then finally, to return to inspire multiple hypotheses, freedom to experiment, and finally returning that learning that we get together, that collective, those collective insights to the system for deeper systemic impact through time. So that for me is how it relates to change management in the daily emergence of the world. Jude, we've been wrestling with the question is how feminine creativity fuels innovation and transformation. And I know you have something great to add for that.
Thank you, Heidi. Well, actually, it's great because we did it together with a lovely man called Grant Story,
Yeah.
who, who is our AI wizard, as well as being a wonderful philosopher builder. Um, but it really is, it's bringing this unitive perspective, the unitive science of that is emergent of a universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves as a living and loving universe in its entirety. So the unitive science, and I'd really want to stress this is evidence-based at all scales of existence and across many different fields of research. But the power of its evidence is able to be then applied to innovation and technology. But it's applied in a very, very different way from an old mechanistic worldview. And even the mechanistic worldview, it might take some quantum properties. It nonetheless comes from that old perspective, that old paradigm of separation of materiality. So the unitive science invites a much deeper, more profound and loving relationship and living and alive and evolution relationship applied to technology and innovation. So we're working together, Heidi and Grant and myself and others, into that opportunity. But also we're working with something we're calling the science of unitive love, soul, because this is how unitive science applies to human experience. So we're inviting an ongoing emergent exploration so that what we can do is invite folks to really understand that when we feel love, we're feeling the universe flow through us. And so I think applying that to innovation and technology could be truly transformational. I know, Heidi, you'd like to say a few more thoughts
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, the great L word that was so unspeakable 10 years ago, which is now, it seems to be showing up everywhere. Maybe because we don't have a choice, there's only one way through. But Humberto Maturana, who is one of my great mentors, a great Chilean biologist whose work moved from the biology of perception to that of cognition, and finally literally came out calling it the biology of love, and how love, the part that love plays on a cellular level in our evolution. He said that the only environment in which learning, true learning, can happen is love. And he defined love very specifically as allowing the other to arise as a legitimate co-creator in our experience. That is what love is. That's why we use dialogue in the process around the deep and rapid transformation, is because that space in which the other is your partner in creating a consensual, our own reality, is actually in alignment with the way it is anyway. It's just that we're joining that process.
Yeah.
When one enters into a major change process, there must be full acceptance of whatever shows up in order to respond to what is needed next. You can't possibly know what to do next if you can't be with whatever is happening. So during a critical assignment, I remember one of the first times I really learned to trust that. It was way back in the early 2000s, and I was working with the number 3 of a Fortune 5 company to integrate 2 very different organizations into one successful one. And it took 7 months just for the participants to begin to address honestly the concerns that were in the way of merging. Forget about merging. It's what is in the way of it that was so impossible to face. And just to the point where we were about to meet with 40 regional leaders to bridge that divide, 9/11 happened literally at the time I was doing the 40th interview with the country director from Spain. And 9/11 happened. I was living near it. So my husband called me and said, quick, look at what's happening. And we weren't allowed to travel for months. So the intervention we were planning was impossible. And yet, rather than postpone the process, we had made a promise to the head of that organization, to the CEO of that organization, that certain things were going to happen. And rather than postpone the process, we stayed with the ideal we aspired to. We found unprecedented ways to keep those interactions alive and engaged in smaller choreographed sets through time, so that the promised results happened anyway. An impossible transition and one of many in those times, all dependent on the ability of leaders to hold the great creative tension between that ideal state and the brutal truth about the current reality. And that during 9/11, if you remember, it was a brutal truth. That brings us to this whole topic of challenges in bringing feminine wisdom into patriarchal systems. Because I was working in an almost an all-male environment. I was often the only female in the room at that time. And so I'd love us to talk about that, Jude. How do you deal with, it's now beginning to melt away. I'm finding it we're no longer talking about building platforms, burning platforms that we have to change. We are on one. So there's I find that there's much more listening to a feminine perspective than there has been. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about those challenges, because I know you lived them too.
I have, yeah, thanks, Heidi. I have. I mean, I was in corporate life for 25 years and ended up running two $500 million turnover businesses in 36 countries. And so I had, 3,500 people sort of working for me and around me and through partners. So absolutely understand that. And I suppose I sort of went through the glass ceiling because I didn't realize there was a glass ceiling. I basically ignored the glass ceiling. And so for me, it was almost I'd lived my life as sacred activism, because for me, what sacred activism is about at its base is there is no them and us. There is just us. And when we talk about a universe and understanding the universe as profoundly unitive and fundamentally interdependent, where we are literally inseparable from each other, our planetary home, the whole world, and yet we are unique, then it comes into a perspective of beyond unity and diversity, beyond unity and inclusion, to unity and belonging. So treating everybody, and this perhaps is the most practical aspect of the golden rule. Treat everybody and know that everybody belongs, however challenging they are, however annoying they are, however awful they may appear to be. We can't separate them. There is no them, there is only us. So it seems to me that at this moment, we are, and you mentioned it, Heidi, we're calling our situation a meta crisis. And yet I know you and I think others, we're reframing it as a metamorphosis. And in a metamorphosis, the old, which is not sustainable, breaks down. And in that nutrient soup begins the emergence and the potential for what could be, if it's a caterpillar, could be a butterfly. And we're now finding the imaginal cells beginning to spring up. And Humanity Rising is a wonderful imaginal cell. And what we're doing in the DRTC is another. And there are many, many, many other. And as we link up and lift up together, we become organelles. And that is the evolutionary process. That is the evolutionary potential and emergent birthing of what we can evolve to be. So it seems to me that bringing feminine attributes into this gentles that, embraces that, holds that, and helps us appreciate how we can be in these, what a dear friend of ours, Youssef Mahmoud, who's an ex-Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, calls these in-between times. So how can we be, through sacred activism, be good ancestors for the future, and bringing, yes, all our feminine attributes, and yes, recognizing that those are naturally complementary, and ultimately in sacred marriage with the masculine attributes, the great universal yin and yang of the whole world. And by bringing those together, as the ancients did in sacred marriage, we may indeed birth the divine child that is within each of us and is all of us in these amazing times of an invitation to adventure and evolution. And Heidi, bring us home, please.
Well, I would say I'm thinking that it's time to bring in Sean and Tom. I'd love to hear what you've been getting from this, and also open it up to the people that are on the call, because clearly we all have something to learn from each other.
Absolutely.
What was showing up for me throughout throughout your conversation, I was getting the impression that the intelligence of the universe has its own agenda, and we're certainly part of that consciousness, but we're going through a yuga, and therefore, all of the things happening on planet Earth that we attribute to destruction, things that humanity has done to liberate 300 gigatons of CO2 from the Earth into the atmosphere. We've resulted in the destruction of hundreds of thousands of species. We've got 1 million species on the endangered species list. We've done all of these things, and so I'm left in this inquiry of how much of it is the consciousness of the universe doing its thing, and how much of it do we actually, as species, as individuals, have our own agency?
That's such a profound question. And I think both Heidi and I are both and girls. If something is an either or, I tend to get slightly what's missing here. And I would say we are microcosmic co-creators of our universe. And so embedded innately, inevitably in its evolutionary potential and impulse. What I'm feeling, and the universe's story over nearly 14 billion years has been one from simplicity to complexity and ever greater levels of self-awareness, individuated self-awareness. So it seems to me that our recent past has been one of progressive individuation of our self-awareness. And we've trod that path and we've become incredibly aware that we are unique individuals. And we're now very aware of what the cost of that extreme individuality is. And so we're waking up, not to blame and shame, and that's not what I'm suggesting, but to wake up to realize that we are both unique microcosmic co-creators and we are inseparable. So if we bring all that we are together to lift up and lift up, link up and lift up together, to light up and level up together, we can be those imaginal cells and organelles of a metamorphosis of our human species in line with the evolutionary impulse of our entire universe. So my sense is there's been a patience. Our universe is very patient when it needs to be, or our planetary home is. But I think like a planetary mother, I think she's got to the edge of her patience. And, us waking up now to remember who we really are and evolve to who we become. If we do, we can become the conscious co-evolutionary partners of that ongoing journey. If not, my suspicion is that we'll be extinct because in Gaia's story, the whole overlights, the good of the whole overlights that of the individual, whether it's a person or a species. So that's, I think, the invitation of the universe. And it's not a threat, but it is an invitation of the universe for us to choose love. And this is our moment of choice.
I have to just piggyback on that, Jude, because I do have a sense of there is some blame and shame in a sense, because at a certain point in this is my take, at a certain part of time, and maybe it was the 19th century when mankind, as opposed to humankind, mankind realized about power and money and the cogs in the wheel. And they began, I'm going to say this is the shame and blame, they began to cultivate a collective where we're not of value, the whole don't have enough, the materialistic, the divisiveness, I need more, I don't have enough, I need to have more than them, and so on. And we have been so programmed, and we talked about this earlier, we've been fed fear, and it has been going on and on until now. Here we are, where we're stuck in our destruction of the earth, right? We have come to the point, and with the divisiveness, and look at the people that we have elected to, quote, lead us. And we have left that soft feminine, but here comes the warrior feminine. And that's part I feel too of the waking up and the coming together that we are one, the coming and that the thread with that is love.
Mhm.
And that unitive science, I love that, the science of unitive love. I want to hear more about that. And then therefore, what does that look like to some degree, whether, when you were talking about deep listening, I think of Bohemian dialogue and so forth.
Mhm.
It's I do want to just say we've been so programmed, and now we are waking up that we're realizing that we've been programmed. And it
Yes.
takes so much to maybe like the autistic children and so forth, and all this awakening for us to realize in terms of the quantum entanglement and so forth, we are one, and that the thread of connection is love. And that's where we need to just, I want to say, be self-vigilant in a sense, because it's simplistic, and yet we've been so programmed to fear. And
Mhm.
I know
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Can I
I'm good
jump
with
in?
sharing
Can I
that.
jump in now? Because somebody's put in the chat is love is all lovey-dovey. Love is not all lovey-dovey. Love is the universal force that holds the whole world together. The deepest definition of love is interdependence, and we truly are interdependent and we're inseparable. It doesn't mean kumbaya necessarily. It does not mean sentimentality. Love is, if we talk about it, love, universal love, is the foundation of who we are. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're sort of expressing as the potential for us to step into. And I would push back a little bit on the blame and shame, because I'm a healer. I've been a healer for 35 years. And I know that blame and shame, my mum used to say something different, but she used to say, do what you can do, and what you can't do, don't worry about. And the reason she said that, because she felt, and I feel, that worrying doesn't get us anywhere. I don't think blame and shame gets us anywhere. What I would like to see us do is absolutely draw a line under the behavior of the past and make whatever restorative and healing and release of trauma from that past enables us. But if we continue to blame and shame, we're still playing the tit for tat and back to and fro of duality. And that's not going, in my view, that's not going to get us where we are. I'm not talking about grey gloop. I'm talking about discernment in that sense, and recognition that we shouldn't collude with bad behavior. But I think it's important that we if we are really serious, if we really are serious about going forward, then for me, those attributes are backwards looking rather than forwards looking.
So picking up on that point, Jude, for a question for the three of you, how do we get out of Einstein's box?
I think for me, we transform our worldview. Donella Meadows, Heidi, I'd love you to talk about Donella's work, because you knew her and your work reflects this. Looked at how you change things. And there were things like you change goals, this, that, and the other. But the thing that was transformative is to change someone's worldview. And the point is, we now have the evidence that is there to support a transformation of worldview, which is why, I produced A Radical Guide to Reality. And it's much more, though, than facts don't change things for people. Emotions change things for people. So the story of A Radical Guide to Reality is an invitation to feel that you belong with the whole world, to know that you're not separate, to move beyond that sense of innate loneliness, to re-embrace our innate humanity and relationship with all life and the whole world.
I would say as well that in my experience, to get out of the box, so to speak, has been a strong meditation practice, because creativity and any, as I've said in the past, there are different portals to alignment with source in the unitive field where all creativity is, and it's being open to those solutions, if you will, that when we can get out of the box through these ways of a transcendent practices, that's when those sparks of creativity will occur. You know, like Einstein would take a nap or whatever, someone's horseback riding or someone's meditating or they're out in nature, whichever happens to be their practice for attunement, because the creativity is out there.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
absolutely.
some of the people who have done transcendental meditation for years and years and years, like, let's just say, you know, Paul McCartney or David Lynch before he passed. I mean, they were never one-hit wonders.
Mhm.
They just were fed and fed and fed creativity. So I think that's one way of finding solutions that are out of the box.
Mhm.
Heidi?
Yes, I wanted to say something about Dana since you brought it. I got to work with Dana for intensively for 1 year on a particular project that we were both part of. And she was the most loving person I've ever met, but also she was extremely strong as well. And one of the things about her, you know, people know her for the dancing with systems, kind of the ability to work with systems and what is the hierarchy of what makes a difference. And it's interesting, at the beginning of that work, Dana said that the most powerful position was to be able to work with paradigms, you know, to change paradigms. And as she continued in her study, her practice of that, she changed that to say there's one even more, which is to operate beyond paradigms.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what this out of the box, when you say get out of Einstein's box, it's the ability to know at any time that we are subject to a paradigm. We are living a worldview or a mindset, and the ability to live in the place that's beyond that is what I call, so that your response is always appropriate to whatever is happening. Very much, if you've read the Gita, you know, Gandhi read the Gita every day, because what it did was it allowed the warrior in you to know when your nature was needed now, not to fall back. Or Martin Luther King's you know, quote about love and power, you know, that love without power, I mean, power without love is cruel. You know, I don't have the exact quote, I have it somewhere here, but power without love, power without love is cruel, but love without power is anemic and will not get us anywhere. So it's the ability to operate in the space beyond those, and to remember that we are the imaginal self, that where we come from is what will manifest. So love doesn't mean, you know, lovey-dovey or whatever somebody put in the chat. It means the ability to see what's happening and to act appropriate to it. That is love.
Do you wonder that we don't love ourselves enough that we can surrender, that we can trust when we're going to go into our, let's just say, personal psyche we're driving into a part of town that's kind of scary. And in terms of our neurobiology, and I'm not an expert on that, those neural pathways that have through many, many years created default responses. And now we need to create some muscle with trust, self-love, that we can travel into those parts of town inside ourselves that the trigger is that we're too scared to go there. So how do we help ourselves, I guess, greater value and trust and love, and of course, you know, amongst everyone else as well. So, you know, that kind of comes up for me.
Yeah, I worked with a CEO. I loved his definition of leadership, which is the ability to take people places they can't go by themselves. And in that sense, that's what you're talking about, is to be in a place where you trust the pure potentiality, and you can put there what you know is what our nature is, right? Is to be able to go there and have people go with you, to trust what you trust, But in order to do that, you can't do that from fear or anger or anything like that. You have to be able to trust your natural response to a condition in front of you because you're actually seeing it. And that you're doing that. And we've seen this, Jude and I've seen this over and over again in what we've been doing together, in the project that we're working on together, is that it immediately reflects where you're coming from, what happens out there in front of you. So it's an immediate mirror. Loving yourself means seeing that, accepting that as part of myself, and being able to then correct that as the imaginal self in this ability to change it now.
Well, in the world that we're in right now, that takes courage, right? That takes a warrior, that takes some muscle, because we're not conditioned these days to love ourselves. And what I love about what Jude, I don't turn this over to you, Jude, but I love what Jude says about how can we not love ourselves when I'm going to say the term vigilant, about the fact that we are starseed. We are. How can we not value? How can we not see our love and our worth when we see our cosmos from that perspective? Jude, yeah, what do you think about it?
I agree, Sean. I mean, one of the things that I'm really loving that is coming through now, that's really helping us, I think it's underpinning and framing this metamorphosis, is this emergent understanding of the wholeness of our universe. But for me, even more than that is the evolutionary story. Just what the universe has gone through to get us to this conversation is extraordinary, and it's so purposeful. And when we look at it and realize it's a 14 billion year journey, whereas you say we are star seeds. It's not just that we're stardust. We mentioned earlier, the water, the hydrogen in the water. Jim mentioned the hydrogen in the water of our bodies is moments younger than the entire universe. The oxygen was created in stars millions, hundreds of million years later. But even going beyond that, before our planetary home was even came into being, before planetary systems came into being, our universe, through generations of stars, had created elemental nutrients that were brought together through the sort of shepherding of magnetic fields and bathed in ultraviolet light. And in the middle of molecular clouds were birthing places where the prebiotic building blocks of biological organisms were there. So we're talking about now the amino acids for proteins. We're talking about lipids and sugars. We've now discovered all the nucleobases of DNA and RNA in an asteroid that is older than our mother Gaia. And so all of that was like the universe gifting us, that birth gifts to us. We are star seeds. What an incredible privilege that is. And then another 4 billion years goes by and we get the continuing evolutionary impulse and flow, all bathed in water. All bathed in water. We are a water planet. We are in the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. The story is just miraculous, really, and wondrous. And
I want to
add one thing. Sorry, I want to add one thing, because if you continue that thread, the random, extraordinary, miraculous gift that you and I and you and each one of us is so randomly beautiful. The gift of this blip of a life experience that, and all of us here at this moment, right? I mean, I could get on my knees and weep.
Yes.
In gratitude.
Yeah.
This
us too. It's just the only thing I would take out is the word random.
Okay.
I only take that word out. Everything else comes. I'll heartily agree with
the miraculous.
Miraculous, yes.
Sean, in that place that you're talking about, I know that what you actually see, that amazing, it isn't random, and that any meeting, any crossing of paths comes for the propagation of love or for the alleviation of suffering. There is not a single thing that I have encountered in the most hardline business that doesn't resonate with that. That it's either an opportunity to propagate the love that, as we're describing it, and or to alleviate the suffering that comes from acting out of line with that love, right? And that is our job. I do want to promote, I have been putting in several times, and we will do it at the end, that what this incredibly beautiful story that Jude was just mentioning, talking about, she has made into an 18-minute.
It's 14-minute film. Yeah.
It's translated into 18 and more languages. It's aimed at 14 or 15-year-olds, but it works for everybody from little children on up. It's available to anyone on YouTube, and I've been dropping in, and we will at the end drop in again. It's called A Radical Guide to Reality, where Jude speaks that story in a way that people have an experience of who they are while they're listening to it. And it's remarkable. I just want to make sure everybody knows that that's a gift that comes from Jude that you can take with you and give to anybody and everybody. In fact, it has no constraints on it. She's offered it to be given freely. And you will have it at the end. We'll make sure it's on at the end.
One of the questions that's arising for me, and I'll reference one of my favorite book titles of all time. Jack Kornfield wrote the book After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. And
now that's a divine feminine.
Oh yeah, it's very divine feminine. Jack's very resonant with the divine feminine.
And so I pose that from a place of inquiry. I mean, we all are, whether we remember it or not, we all are loved. We all are lovable. We all are love. And yet we have to do the laundry. We have to do the things that take us through our daily life. And so how do we, it's the end, but how do we live our life of remembering this extraordinary experience that we have, this thing called a life, and do the practical realities of what's required to be in society, to be alive?
I'd love to share. Thank you for that, Tom. And it's such a beautiful question. It reminds me when I was doing my PhD in archaeology, I did something called field walking, which is basically you walk fields. It says with the can. And what you're doing is, well, what we were doing is we were looking for Neolithic flints. And I was in a huge field one morning, a beautiful morning, bright blue sky, on my own because the other volunteers that were helping me hadn't arrived. And I was being a bit disgruntled. You know, the equipment I'd had to lug over there was heavy, and my boots were caked with heavy soil, and I was Mrs. Grumpy. And out of a clear blue sky came these words: "In the commonality of our humanity, we're all ordinary. In the commonality of our divinity, we're all extraordinary." And that has stayed with me ever since, finding the ordinary in that miraculous extraordinary, but also finding the extraordinary in what we might perceive as the ordinary is just such an amazing dance if we're open, if we say yes to the dance, our dance partner, which is the universe.
I don't know if this is reflective of that, but sometimes in the fall when all the leaves have come down, you know, and I go walking in the woods and they're all kind of mushy, right? And they're dead. You know, it's not, you know, usually, you know, I align with nature when there's the beautiful changing colors of the leaves on the trees. And yet I'm now noticing how wonderful and miraculous the fact that they're rotting on the ground is as well.
Yeah. Yeah, to compost. And in a way, I mean, I know that, you know, we're talking about a metamorphosis as our potential in these times. And a metamorphosis, you know, in a way, composts the caterpillar. You know, it composts the old, because without composting the old, the new can't come forward. So how do we hospice? How we hospice the old that no longer serves us? We take through the best. We take through the nutrients that can continue to sustain us in our way forward. But we hospice and compost what no longer serves us.
How about for you, Heidi? What's there?
Particularly about your question, one of my favorite spiritual practices I ever learned, speaking of water and steam, was the practice, and I practice it every day still to this day, that was 30 years ago, was letting the attention rest where the working surfaces meet. In every moment of now, if one lets one's attention rest where the working surfaces meet of anything we're doing, anything we're being, what you have is an immediate access to the whole story. And we particularly applied it in ironing. I mean, you brought up laundry, and I had to laugh because where I first experienced it was in ironing a shirt. The space between the iron and the cloth is where the work happens. There is a space. There is always a space in between anything that looks like it's next to each other. And what actually did it was the water, the steam from the iron onto the shirt. It wasn't pressing. It was literally allowing the space to work with the fabric. And we applied that in making bread, in making mozzarella, in setting the table. And I brought it home to my family. And so at any moment you have that opportunity when doing the laundry to find out that you're living in the cosmos. And you're part of the great hologram, as Jude calls it. It's available to us at every second, but we have to be there for it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm a gardener, so just sorry.
Yeah, gardening.
I was just
just
saying,
going
as
to
the
invite you
gardener,
back into the conversation as we come up to the end of our program today. But go ahead, Jude, please, gardening.
just to complete on that point, and I'm a gardener, and I am so excited at the moment because my broad beans are beginning to grow, my peas are beginning to grow. So I can't tell you how miraculous I find when I plant a little seed and this tiny little shoot comes up, and I see it and I love it and I'm so grateful for it. And then after whatever period of time, we have the harvest, and so grateful for that. And that may seem very ordinary, but for me, it's one of the most beautiful, extraordinary expressions of a loving universe.
Well said.
Jim.
Jude, your last comment reminded me of my little grandson. He's just learned to walk, and you can see in his cognitive development, he's starting to really observe the outside world. And my son has sent a couple of videos of little Charlie, digging and picking up little seeds, or, pulling a radish out of the soil and looking at it in complete and utter astonishment. You wonder what's going on in that little mind of his as he's trying to figure out the universe. But I'd like to circle back to Tom's initial question, which since we have a cosmologist on the program today, and another woman deeply immersed in the natural mysteries of things, this question that was posed by Veda around water and our thoughts and where our thoughts come from, and the speculation that they emanate out of the water in our bodies, as the water in our bodies is in tune with all the water everywhere. And our own differentiation. When you say, at one level we're all the same, and at another level we're all special, where do the two of you, within the context of how you understand the cosmos, how does free will or independent agency, shall we call it, we look at the cells in our bodies, and what they're beginning to find out, as you all know, is that even the cells have a little bit of agency.
Mm.
They're not just automatons. And the animal kingdom, similarly, what we used to think were these little animals governed completely by instinct, we're beginning to discover that they have personalities. Some of them are lazy, some of them are industrious. There's aggressive ones, there's alpha males, and then but beta males, and it's similar on the female side. So where did the two of you each come out on this question of individuality in an interconnected universe?
Heidi, are you happy if I run at this
Please.
first?
Yes, Jude and I have had this conversation ongoing.
Cool.
Yes.
I'm glad
Absolutely.
somebody is.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'd take us, Jim, I'd take a step back and say our entire universe in its manifestation, all energy, matter, and space-time are innately informed and informational. So water is a beautiful expression of that universality, but it's only one expression, but it's a key one, it's a vital one, because it does hold memory and it does hold resonance in the most exquisite ways. So I'd just like to sort of take us to a deeper perspective that everything is meaningfully informed and made up of meaningful information, not just through water, but because of the nature of the unitive universe. And secondly, you mentioned the word independent. I would reframe that as interdependent. Yeah, because in a sense, I would say that yes, we do have free will, and both going back to the both and, we do have choice, we do have agency, and at the same time, because of our inseparability and innate interdependence, and therefore because our collective psyche is intertwined, we do make choices from the fractal scaling up of our entire species. So, for example, if we look at the patterns, if we look at the relationships throughout the natural world, in earthquakes, we see a relationship between the frequency of earthquakes and the destructive power of earthquakes, to the extent that there's no such thing as an average earthquake. If we do a graph of earthquakes and we plot all earthquakes, it forms a straight line. And that says there's no such thing as an average earthquake. It says that there's only one thing you can say, that an earthquake that is more powerfully destructive is less frequent, with a particular relationship of that. Okay. Now, if we plot human conflicts in the same way, so the frequency of human conflicts plotted against their destructive power in the terms of fatalities, we get exactly the same relationship. It's called a power law than does earthquakes. And that says again that there's no such thing as an average conflict, that, the conflict that is more destructive is less frequent, but that's the only relationship, just as for earthquakes. Now, both earthquakes and conflicts and every other aspect of the appearance of our universe is underpinned by what's called holotropic attractors of information. So for us, in that regard, our underlying attractor of our collective psyche means that we have a collective worldview that is along a spectrum, from one of unity to one of separation. But the frequency, as it were, of consciousness, the level of awareness of our whole collective, means that we still make choices. We make choices from love, but we're also still making choices from fear. Now, in evolutionary terms, when a holotropic attractor of information is sufficiently unsustainable for whatever reason, whether it's an ecosystem and an environment or whether it's us, it begins to break down. And at the same time, an attractor of higher level coherence, you might say higher level evolutionary potential, begins to form. And that's what I think is happening now. And in that process of metamorphosis, something called flickering happens, where the dying of the old sort of tries to bridge to the new. And the more that there are the foci, the focal points of imaginal cells in that newness, the greater that the bridging can occur until the metamorphosis succeeds and the emergent butterfly, or in our case, the emergence of a new humanity, can move forward. But that means that we both have interdependent agency of choice. Do we stay in the old and break down with it? Or do we take that leap into love and together co-create a new world where, if conflict is the natural outcome of a worldview of separation, then peace is the natural outcome of a worldview of wholeness and love?
I love this notion of interdependent agency. That's a nice way to put it. Thank you. And I hadn't taken in, this is new to me, that the graph for the earthquakes and the graph for human violence is essentially the same.
Yeah.
That the more destructive, the less frequent.
Yeah. It's called a power law. And power laws are like fractals. Power laws, pervade, our universe. They're just natural ways of relationships. But yes, so that's why we cannot separate ourselves from what we might term the natural world. It is truly, in its entirety, we are part of that innate interdependence and ultimate inseparability.
Yeah. One thinks of the Russian astronomer, I think his name was Bukovsky, looking at the sun flares. That the more intense the sun flares, the more intense the battles that he was observing in the First World War.
Yeah.
That's that interdependence that you're talking about. The general on the battlefield had no idea there was even a sun flare going on. So one again comes back to thought and how the planetary alignments and the photons that are coursing through our bodies, how they're really shaping us in ways we have no way of even comprehending. And yeah, so thank you for that. What would be your comment, Heidi?
What she said.
I think we're all going to say that.
Well, Heidi,
Yes,
not to let you off the hook, but I'm curious from a change management perspective,
Yeah.
if we are interdependent in the way that Jude describes,
Yes.
how do we honor that interdependence to enable change to happen?
Well, we started to get at this, that in observing what's going on, not automatically assuming separateness, but actually seeing that interdependence actually in flow, that you're actually watching. You can actually say, actually, Sean, you talked about it in the practice of meditation, that one begins to see the automatic response that comes from years of conditioning. And in that seeing, one has a choice in how one interacts with the world. And that there is a profound, and because of that interdependence, we don't have to say, oh, well, now I'm going to do this, so so it should go like this. No, the minute that you are in that space where you're actually watching the automatic response and now beginning to allow the evolutionary one to be there, knowing automatically there's an interdependence, that's actually, to me, where change happens. It's not in what we decide to do or in the strategies we do or anything like that. It's actually in that observation moment by moment and allowing the choice to be made about how you interact with an interactive, informational cosmic hologram. I mean, that's really what our choice is at every moment. Are we there to interact in a way that we want to see it turn out? That's really the question. It starts here. Or
how do we get beyond? How do we get beyond the paradigms?
To me, it's that's what Dana brought to me, was the ability to be the space in which those paradigms are being observed at the same time as one is interacting with them. That comes from the kind of practice that Sean mentioned, a lifelong practice of electing to sit there in observation of what's going on. All the great traditions will give you a practice like that. And they work. They work profoundly.
And I think just to bring us home, perhaps, it's where we've been is, we know, unsustainable, and it's also mistaken. Separation is an illusion. So by bringing us to a unitive perspective, let's hold that lightly. Let's see it as a work in progress to whatever may come beyond that. But it's almost as though, at least if we can heal the traumas of separation and step into an understanding of wholeness and our belonging within that wholeness, that begins to shake us free of limitations and constrictions and paradigms that really don't serve us, and they don't, in our view, I think, serve the evolutionary impulse of the entire universe. So I think we're on the J word. We've done the L word, the J word, the journey, and it continues.
Just reflecting for a moment, because this is very rich. I'm just in my mind connecting what you were just saying, Heidi, that what the Sufis would call the witness,
Yeah.
that we reflect upon ourselves even as we're acting reflexively.
Yes.
And, what I was just thinking, tying into what you're saying, Jude, that if the reality is interdependent agency, that means that the capacity, even if for a moment, to take us out of the interdependence as an observer is what gives us agency. In other words, if we're always in the interdependent flow, we're in the flow and it's taking us, but that discipline, that moment that you talked about right at the beginning, Heidi, which I found really intriguing, and I've been pondering it, and it's just come into a little nascent inquiry about the relationship between that capacity to engage in the witness that gives us the agency in an interdependent world. I don't know. That could be completely delusional also.
You really are taking John's advice beyond paradigms, Jim.
I do want to acknowledge that there's been an incredible chat going on.
Yeah.
That people and number of people have mentioned breath as that the awareness of breath, and that is also a doorway to what we're talking about. It takes us out of our heads and into the interconnectedness. And I just want, even though we haven't had a chance to dip into these, I just want people out there to know that we've been watching them and that they're really inspiring the conversation that's happening out there about this.
We also can redefine, I talk about the big breath rather than the big bang, because we know our universe didn't begin, it began minute, but it didn't begin in the chaos of a bang. It was the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And so if we can have that sense of its vastness, of that big breath breathing through us in every moment, we can have that profound experiential sense of interdependence and belonging by the breath, which is, the chat is wonderful, because the breath is what connects all of us, and it connects us with our entire universe. If anybody watches A Radical Guide to Reality, you'll see that it begins with everything breathes.
Well, good. I think that's a nice note to close on. Tom, do you want to tee us up for our grand finale tomorrow?
Yeah, I would just, it's been an extraordinary week, and huge call out to Sean for helping to organize the panelists we've had this week. And I'm just beyond excited to have the opportunity to have everyone join us that has been with us this week for a fireworks of sorts of what's going to unfold tomorrow. And anyone who has watched us this week, I invite you back tomorrow to experience an extraordinary conversation.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Sean, Jude, Heidi. It's been a very rich dialogue today. All my neural synapses are just scintillating with interdependent agency. Thank you, Jude. Thank you,
Thanks,
Heidi.
Jude.
That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You can join Heidi and Jude in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box, and you receive the link in your Zoom reminders for today. And then just one note, just so that we're keeping pace with unfolding events. This is our final week as a full week on Humanity Rising. And then beginning next week, we'll be meeting only on Fridays moving forward, because as I've mentioned a number of times, Tom and I are getting very caught up in this new State of the World Forum, which is really humanity rising by another means. So
Right.
nothing is stopping, but as we've heard today, everything is transforming through that interdependent agency. So thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jude.